I remember the exact way the sun was pouring through the kitchen window that afternoon, warm, golden light spilling across the table, hitting the cracks in the old wood I'd polished 100 times before. It was the kind of light that usually made me feel safe. But that day it felt like a spotlight, like something was about to break. My oldest, James, was the first to speak. He cleared his throat, looking everywhere but at me. His wife had made a pitcher of sweet tea, like she was hosting some kind of family celebration. My daughter Marissa sat to his left, hands clasped so tight in her lap her knuckles were white. My youngest, Ethan, leaned against the wall with that nervous, twitchy energy he got whenever he was about to say something he didn't have the courage to own. "Mom," James finally started, his voice too soft, too rehearsed, "we've been talking, and we think it's time we do what's best for you." I didn't answer. I just let him speak. I could hear the tremor in his words, the way people sound when they've already decided something for you, and they're trying to dress it up to look like kindness. Marissa reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "You've done so much for us, Mama," she said. Her voice cracked on the word mama like it was supposed to make me feel cared for. "But the house is big. You're getting older. It's a lot for you to manage alone. We've been looking at options, really good ones. Somewhere with people your age, where you won't feel lonely anymore." I stared at her hand on mine. These were the same fingers I'd held when she was 5 and terrified of thunder. The same hands I used to braid her hair with before school every morning. I gently pulled my hand away. "What kind of options?" I asked, though I already knew where this was heading. Ethan pushed himself off the wall, pulled out a glossy brochure, and slid it across the table. The paper gleamed like it was proud of itself. I didn't even have to read the name to understand. A nursing home. A senior living community, as they like to call it these days. Beautiful gardens, bingo nights, smiling nurses in starched uniforms. They always make it look like paradise. But I've been around long enough to know that paradise isn't something you sign yourself into. James leaned forward, his elbows on the table like he was pitching me a business deal. "It's one of the best in the state, Mom. Private rooms, full-time care, activities, everything. You won't have to cook or clean or worry about anything anymore. You deserve to relax." My heart was pounding, but I kept my face calm. I learned a long time ago that silence can be louder than shouting. They started filling that silence one by one. Marissa jumped in. "And it's close to us, just 30 minutes from here. We'll visit all the time, I promise." Ethan, not quite as practiced as the other two, added in a rush. "And we can finally sell this old house. It's worth a lot now, Ma. The neighborhood's changed. You'll be better off, and—" James shot him a sharp look, but the damage was done. There it was. The part they hadn't rehearsed out loud but had definitely rehearsed in their minds. I smiled then, a small tired smile. The kind of smile that has lived through too much to be fooled. "Sell the house," I repeated softly, almost to myself. Marissa's face flushed. "That's not what he meant," she said quickly. "Ethan just misspoke. We only care about you." They didn't notice, but my hands were resting on the edge of the table, steady as stone. I'd faced harder things in my life than this moment. Harder storms. I looked at each of them in turn. These were my children. The same children I carried on my hip, kissed goodnight, stayed up late sewing costumes for, worked double shifts to feed and keep warm. I thought I knew them inside out. But in that golden afternoon light, their faces looked like strangers wearing the skin of my babies. "When did you all decide this?" I asked. James glanced at Marissa, then at Ethan. "We've been talking about it for a few months," he admitted. "We just didn't want to upset you before we had something solid. So, they'd been making plans for my life without me. My own children." I took a slow breath and nodded, not because I agreed, but because I needed to keep my heartbeat from rattling the room. Ethan tried to lighten the air with a laugh that fell flat. "You gotta admit, Ma, you hate yard work. And all those stairs. This place has elevators, heated pools. You could finally live a little, you know? Live a little." I built my entire life brick by brick so they could live a little. I'd sacrificed nights, birthdays, and sleep. I'd mopped floors at dawn and balanced books at midnight. And now, after all these years, they were offering me a one-way ticket to a place where old folks are tucked away like family heirlooms that no longer fit the living room. But I didn't let any of that spill out yet. Not yet. Instead, I asked the question I knew would make them fidget. And who exactly is going to handle the house if I agree to this? James straightened his back. We figured we could take care of it. Maybe sell it, maybe rent it out. It's just sitting here, Mom. You don't need this big place anymore. He said it like my home, the place I built my life in, was some dusty piece of furniture taking up space. I stared at the brochure again, then folded it slowly and slid it back toward him. I see, I said. Marissa tried to reach for me again. We just want what's best for you. You're not getting any younger, Mama. We worry about you being alone. There was something about the way she said alone that caught in my chest. They didn't know me. Not really. They hadn't noticed how much of my life was still mine. How much I still had left. I stood up slowly, letting the chair creak behind me. I appreciate your concern, I said, my voice steady. But I'm not signing anything today. James sighed, frustrated but trying not to show it. Mom, we're not trying to hurt you. We just want to make sure you're taken care of before something happens. Before something happens, I repeated. Well, thank you for your concern. I walked over to the kitchen window and looked out at the magnolia tree I'd planted with their father the year James was born. Its branches stretched wide now, strong and rooted. It had seen storms come and go. Just like me. They kept talking behind me. Soft voices, rehearsed lines, half-truths dressed as love. But their words floated away like dust. Because in that quiet moment, as I stood looking out over the yard, something inside me clicked into place. The betrayal stung, yes. But underneath the hurt, something else began to rise. Something solid. Unshakable. They thought they could decide my life for me. They thought they knew everything. But what they didn't know, what none of them had ever bothered to ask, was that this old house wasn't just a house. And I wasn't some weak old woman who could be packed away like a box in the attic. I turned back to them, calm as ever. Thank you for coming, I said. I'll think about it. The lie rolled off my tongue easily, because while they thought they were moving chess pieces on a board they owned, they were standing in a game I built. And I still held the queen. I can still remember the smell of fresh paint and cheap coffee from the night I signed the papers for this house. Back then it wasn't much. Just a creaky old building on the corner of a street most folks avoided after dark. But it was mine. My husband and I used to stand right where the living room is now, holding each other and talking about what this place would become. He had dreams of turning it into something special. Me? I just wanted a roof over our babies' heads and a future they could be proud of. When he passed away, everything changed. I was 35 with 3 kids, a mortgage that felt like a mountain, and no plan except to survive. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with stacks of bills, tears smudging the ink, wondering how in the world I was supposed to carry it all on my back. But when you're a mother, there isn't time to crumble. You get up, wipe your face and figure it out. That's exactly what I did. James was 10 then, old enough to sense the weight pressing down on me. He used to sneak out of bed and watch me work at night, whispering, "It's okay, Mama. I'll help when I grow up." Marissa was 6, curious and gentle, always leaving little drawings on the fridge, pictures of us holding hands in front of this house. Ethan was just a baby, all big eyes and a laugh that could cut through the darkest night. I lived for those smiles. They were my anchor. I started picking up extra shifts at the diner down on Main Street. It wasn't glamorous, burned coffee, screaming kids, drunks who didn't know when to quit, but it was steady money. I cleaned offices on weekends too. Sometimes I'd leave the house before sunrise and come back after they'd already fallen asleep. I'd watch them breathe and whisper promises into the dark. Promises that they would never have to struggle the way I did. Little by little, the house began to change. I fixed the plumbing myself, repainted the walls. Every paycheck went to keeping it standing. When the roof leaked, I climbed up there with a hammer and nails, hands bleeding, heart pounding, but I did it anyway. I didn't have anyone to fall back on, so I became my own safety net. There were nights I sat in this same kitchen, the one where my children now talk to me like I'm fragile glass, and I cried quietly into my hands. Not because I wanted to give up, but because it was hard being the only one who had to be strong. But I kept going. Because mothers like me don't have the luxury of giving up. I remember the day I made my first real investment. It wasn't the house, it was the building next door. Most folks saw it as a crumbling mess, a money pit. I saw opportunity. I borrowed against my life insurance, scared half to death, and bought it. I turned the upstairs into small rental units, fixed them up with my own 2 hands and found tenants. That was the beginning of everything. That's how the seed was planted. James used to help me paint the walls. Marissa handed me nails and screws like she was part of a construction crew. Ethan toddled around with his plastic toy hammer, fixing everything in sight. I was proud of what we were building together, even if they didn't really understand it at the time. And then the years rolled by like pages in a book you don't realize you've read too fast. The kids grew up, moved out, found their own lives. I encouraged them to fly, to chase whatever dreams they had. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't tell them about the trust one set up in my name. I didn't tell them that I quietly bought the building across the street, too, or that the rent from those units paid for their college tuition and braces and dance recitals and summer camps. I didn't tell them because it wasn't about the money. It was about building something solid enough to outlive my struggle. But somewhere along the way something changed. I started noticing it when they'd come home for holidays. James would look around the house like he was taking inventory, making little comments about how much the neighborhood had appreciated in value. Marissa would casually ask about my will, like she was just making conversation. Ethan, well, he's always been the one with big dreams and small patience. He once joked about flipping this house when I got too old to climb the stairs. It stung, but I laughed it off then. I suppose I wanted to believe they'd never see me as a burden. I wanted to believe the love we built here was stronger than greed. I remember one Christmas, the last one we all spent under this roof as a whole family. Snow piled on the windowsills, the tree lights glowing softly. They sat in this kitchen laughing about old times. James said something like, "Ma, when you're too old to cook, we'll just ship you off to one of those fancy places." They all laughed. I laughed too, but a part of me froze. I didn't forget. And now years later that joke isn't a joke anymore. I stare at their faces in the present, older, sharper, more distant. They don't see me as the woman who built all of this from nothing. They see me as an aging problem they need to manage. They think my hands are too shaky to hold a hammer anymore. They think my mind is too soft to understand what they're doing. But they've forgotten who raised them. They've forgotten how many nights I spent figuring out how to make a dollar stretch when there was nothing left. They've forgotten the backbone I had to build just to keep us afloat. I've never told them everything I own. I've never told them the house, the rental units, the investments. All of it is under my name. They've walked around all these years thinking this was just some old house holding memories. They have no idea that this is more than just a roof. It's an empire. A small one maybe, but mine. Back then, when I was knee-deep in work, people used to call me stubborn. Maybe they were right. But stubbornness kept the lights on. Stubbornness kept their stomachs full and their futures open. So as they sit across from me now, pushing brochures across my table like they're doing me some kind of favor, they don't realize they're standing on ground I built brick by brick. I look at them and almost laugh, not out of humor, but out of the deep, quiet power that comes from knowing something they don't. They think they're moving me out. They think they're taking control. But they're standing in a house that doesn't just belong to me. I built this house. I own the land beneath their feet. And soon they'll learn just how big their mistake really is. Because if there's one thing I've learned in this life, it's this. Never underestimate a woman who's had to build everything on her own. They may think they're playing me, but they're playing a game they don't even know I invented. The morning after that conversation, the house felt different. Not because anything had changed physically, the floor still creaked the same, the air still smelled faintly of lemon polish and coffee, but because I could feel the shift in the air. The kind of quiet that follows when someone's already made decisions about your life and hasn't bothered to ask your permission. James showed up again just after breakfast, carrying that same tight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning, Mom," he said, stepping into the house like it already belonged to him. He didn't even wait for me to answer before setting down a stack of papers on the kitchen counter. Marissa came next, looking put together. Hair perfect, voice soft like she thought I'd break if she spoke too loud. Ethan trailed behind, phone in hand, barely looking up. James tapped the folder in front of me like it was a gift. "We've been working on a few details," he said. "You know, to make the transition smoother." Transition. The word sat heavy between us. Not move. Not choice. Transition. Like I was being relocated. I opened the folder slowly, like peeling the skin off a wound. Inside were papers I didn't ask for, medical forms, financial estimates, A reservation slip from a senior living community. They'd already put down a deposit. James, I said, my voice low. What is this? It's just paperwork, Mom. Don't get upset, he said, raising his hands like I was the unreasonable one. We thought it would be better to handle everything for you. Less stress on your end. Less stress for me. More control for them. Marissa slid a glossy brochure toward me. The same one I saw yesterday, but now marked with circles and underlines like they'd already made decisions without me. We toured the place last week, she said. It's really beautiful, Mama. They have gardens, they do movie nights. It's not some dreary nursing home. It's a community. You'd be surrounded by people your age. I didn't answer. I just looked at her, really looked at her. My daughter, who once cried in my arms after her first heartbreak, now talking to me like I was a patient to be managed. Ethan finally looked up from his phone. Look, Ma, this place isn't cheap, okay? But we figured out a way to make it work. Once we sell the house, there'll be more than enough to cover it. You can live there for years without worry. There it was again. Sell the house. They said it so casually, like it wasn't the ground beneath their childhood, like it wasn't the very thing I bled for. I leaned back in my chair and folded my arms. And when did I say I was selling the house? Ethan glanced at James. Marissa's face tensed. James cleared his throat. Mom, it's not about selling. It's about making sure you're safe. We can't have you living here alone anymore. You could fall. You could. James, I interrupted, calm and steady. When did I say I was selling the house? The silence that followed was heavier than the words they'd thrown at me the day before. Marissa shifted uncomfortably. We just thought it made sense, she whispered. I let out a small laugh, not a joyful one, but the kind that comes when you finally see through people. I see. You've been thinking a lot. I stood up slowly. Their eyes followed me like I might collapse. I moved to the window, the same one I'd looked through when I made my first real investment decades ago. The magnolia tree outside swayed gently in the breeze, its roots deep and strong. You know, I said, still facing the window, when your father and I bought this house, we didn't have much. Just a lot of faith and a mortgage that scared the hell out of us. Every beam in this house has a story. Every nail was earned with sweat. But maybe you don't remember that part. James let out a soft sigh. Mom, this isn't about the past. It's always about the past, I replied, turning to face them. You just forgot to include me in the conversation. Ethan rolled his eyes, and for a second I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who thought everything would always be handed to him because I made sure of it. James picked up a pen from the folder. Look, we're not trying to be the bad guys here. We're trying to protect you. We can list the house this month, get a good price. Real estate is hot right now. You'd be comfortable. We'd make sure of it. Make sure of it, I repeated softly. They didn't see the way my jaw clenched, or maybe they did and thought it meant I was scared. But I wasn't scared. Not anymore. I walked over to the folder and slowly closed it, my hand pressing down on the paper like sealing a deal they didn't even know they were losing. I appreciate your concern, I said evenly. But I'm not going anywhere. Marissa's voice rose, gentle but desperate. Mama, please. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We just want what's best for you. I tilted my head. What's best for me? Or what's best for you? The question hit the air like a slap. For a long moment, none of them said a word. Then Ethan blurted out what the others wouldn't. Come on, Ma, this place is worth a fortune. You're sitting on a gold mine, and you're living in it like it's nothing. You could have the life you deserve. And we could all. He caught himself, but it was too late. There it was. Not just concern. Not just planning. Greed. James hissed. Ethan. Under his breath, but the damage was done. I smiled slowly, not because I was happy, but because everything was finally clear. I'd been a fool to ignore the little comments over the years, the sidelong glances when I talked about the house. I thought love was stronger than money. But money has a way of turning people into strangers. I walked back to my chair and sat down again, calm and collected. I'll tell you what, I said softly. I'll think about it. Marissa leaned forward, eyes hopeful. Really? Of course, I said. If we're talking about something this big, I need time. That's only fair, isn't it? They all nodded. They thought they'd won a small victory. But they didn't notice the way I watched their faces, memorizing every look, every whisper. When they finally left, the house fell quiet again. I stood in the middle of the living room and let out a long, shaky breath. It wasn't fear that filled me. It was something sharper, stronger. They thought they were planning my future behind my back. But I'd built a life learning how to survive people who underestimated me. And this time I wasn't going to just survive. I was going to make sure they never forgot who they were dealing with. I walked over to the old cabinet in the hallway, the one no one ever bothered to open. Inside, beneath a stack of yellowed photo albums, was a folder of my own. Deeds, trust documents, ownership papers they didn't even know existed. I ran my fingers along the edges, feeling the power in those pages. Let them bring their pens and their brochures. They don't know the game they've stepped into. And I intend to keep it that way. The first real sign that they weren't just talking came 3 days later. I was standing in the kitchen, the sun barely up, the house still wrapped in that early morning quiet I love so much. That's when I heard the low murmur of voices outside my front porch. James and Marissa were out there. I hadn't even heard their car pull up. I walked softly down the hall, my old slippers brushing against the wood floor, and stopped just behind the door. Their voices carried through the thin screen. "She'll come around," James was saying. "She always does. She just needs to feel like it's her idea." Marissa's voice followed, quieter but sharp. "I don't know, James. She's being stubborn. And if she doesn't agree, the house just sits here. You and I both know what that means for the rest of us." I could practically see her crossing her arms like she used to when she was little and didn't get her way. James let out a short, dry laugh. "Don't worry. I've already called a realtor friend. If she signs the power of attorney, we can handle everything without dragging it out. We'll just make it easy for her." Power of attorney. There it was. The wolf without its sheep's clothing. I felt something in my chest go cold. They weren't just thinking about this, they were planning it. Step by step. Ethan's car rolled up a few minutes later. He didn't even knock. "So?" he asked as he joined them. "She'll give in," James said confidently. "She doesn't have anyone else. It's just us." And just like that, the three of them started talking about their plans as if I didn't exist. I stood behind that door for nearly 10 minutes, listening to my own children carve out my future like they were splitting up a pie. When they finally left, their voices fading down the driveway, I didn't cry. I thought I would. But no, there were no tears this time. Just a strange, steady calm. That afternoon I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the magnolia tree. My husband and I planted it together the year we moved in. Its roots run deep. That tree has outlasted storms, floods, termites, and time. I looked at it and thought, me too. People have been underestimating me my whole life. They underestimated me when I was a young widow, when I bought my first property, when I fixed broken pipes with my own hands. And now my own children were underestimating me. I stood up and went to my bedroom closet, reaching for the small fireproof lockbox I've kept hidden for decades. Inside were folders neatly labeled: property deeds, trust documents, rental agreements. Every piece of this land was mine, legally and without dispute. I own not just this house but the building across the street and the 2 duplexes down the block. I built that little empire quietly with grit and patience. My children thought I'd only held on to the family home out of sentiment. They never once imagined the full picture. I ran my hand over the crisp legal documents, the embossed seals, the signatures. These weren't just papers. This was the story of my survival. Later that week, I decided to play my part. I answered their calls with softness, let my voice tremble a little, let them think I was tired, confused. They came by more often, all smiles and sweet talk, calling me Mama, in that syrupy way people use when they're trying to cover something sharp. Marissa brought casseroles and fussed over my blood pressure. James started talking about protecting me, in that tone that made it sound like I'd already lost control of my life. Ethan, bless his greedy little heart, didn't even bother with the act. He just kept asking me when I was ready to start this new chapter. I nodded, smiled, made them coffee. All the while I was watching them closer than I ever had before. It was Ethan who slipped up first. He left his jacket draped over the couch one afternoon, and when I went to hang it up, a folded piece of paper fell out of the pocket. It wasn't a receipt. It was a copy of a listing agreement for my house, dated but not yet signed. A realtor's name was printed neatly at the top. They'd already started the process. I folded the paper back exactly as I'd found it and returned it to the pocket. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Then came Marissa's phone call, the one she didn't know I could hear. She'd stepped outside to take a work call, but the window was open and her voice carried through the screen. Once she signs, it's done, she said. The lawyer said the title transfer would take a few weeks. We just have to keep her calm until then. Keep me calm. They thought they were so smart. I spent that night lying awake, not out of sadness but planning. Planning the way I used to when bills piled higher than paychecks. Planning the way a woman does when she's got more power than people think. The next day I made an appointment with my lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the same man who helped me buy this house all those years ago. Old, sharp as a tack, and loyal. When I walked into his office, he greeted me with that familiar nod. Been a long time, he said. Too long, I replied. He listened quietly as I told him everything. Every word they'd said, every piece of paper they'd moved behind my back. He didn't look surprised. Families, he muttered. It always comes to this when property's involved. I'm not giving them control, I said firmly. Not 1 inch. He nodded. Good. Then we'll make sure they can't touch a thing without your say-so. He explained the options. I didn't need most of them. I'd already made sure years ago that the property couldn't be transferred without my direct consent. But we tightened everything up. Added a few locks they'd never know existed. By the time I walked out of that office, the power I'd built all those years ago was solid as stone. Back home I played the part perfectly. When James stopped by, I let him talk at me like he was guiding a lost child. Marissa kept bringing food. Ethan talked about how great the nursing home looked. I smiled, nodded, pretended I didn't know. They thought they were walking me into a trap. But they were walking into mine. One night, after they'd all gone, I sat at the kitchen table with the magnolia tree framed perfectly in the window. I poured myself a cup of tea and whispered into the quiet house. You don't get to decide my story. This home, these walls, this life, I built it. Alone. And if they thought they could take it from me with slick smiles and signatures, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I spent the next few days listening more than talking. They thought I was too old to notice, too soft to understand, too fragile to fight back. That was their biggest mistake. I kept my voice steady, my movements calm, and my face blank whenever they spoke around me. But inside, every single word they said became another stone in the wall I was building. I started to notice small things I once ignored. The way Eric lowered his voice when he stepped outside to take a call. The way Linda would leave papers in her tote bag but never on the table when I came into the room. The way Jessica glanced at me when she thought I wasn't looking, not with love or concern but calculation. They weren't planning this for my well-being. They were preparing to take everything. I woke up early one morning, just as the sun rose and the house was quiet. I walked into the kitchen, and from the window I could see Eric in the backyard pacing on his phone. His voice carried through the thin air. Yeah, the place could fetch a lot. It's a great location. She's not gonna need it once she's in that home. My chest tightened, but I didn't let a sound escape my lips. I watched him like a stranger, the boy I raised, now talking about me like I was a problem to be solved. Later that afternoon, Linda came over with her tablet. She thought I was taking a nap, but I stood just outside the doorway. I could hear her talking to Jessica on speaker. I found the perfect buyer. If we move quickly, we can list it right after she signs the power of attorney. My daughter's voice on the other end was cold and flat. Good. Let's just get this over with. I don't want to drag it out. She's had her time. She's had her time. The words sliced deep. All the nights I spent rocking them when they were sick. The birthday cakes I baked when I barely had enough money for the ingredients. The winter coats I bought with my own overtime money. All of it condensed into a single sentence that erased me like I was a faded photograph. I knew if I confronted them now, they'd twist it. They'd smile and talk gently, tell me I was overreacting, that they were only trying to help. So I stayed quiet. I let them think I was slow. I let them think they were winning. But I made up my mind. I wasn't going to let them throw me away like an old chair. I began to pay attention to every detail. Where they left their papers. Who they called. What they whispered. Eric forgot his messenger bag in the living room one night. I didn't snoop. I didn't need to. A single paper sticking out caught my eye. A list of expenses and a printed email about selling Mom's property. It wasn't even titled The House. It was The Property. Like I wasn't part of it anymore. The next day, Jessica sat me down at the same kitchen table where they told me their plan. Mom, we need to make sure everything's in order. We don't want you to worry about a thing. That's why we talked to a lawyer. You'll just have to sign some papers so we can handle everything for you. Her voice was syrupy sweet. I'd heard that tone before, when she wanted something as a child. But this wasn't about cookies or toys anymore. I nodded slowly, pretending to be the frail old woman they wanted me to be. I trust you, I said softly. Her smile widened, but she didn't see the fire behind my eyes. I had spent decades building this life. Every floorboard in this house had a story. Every brick in that building down the street had my sweat on it. I wasn't handing over a lifetime of sacrifice to children who'd forgotten what loyalty meant. That night, I sat in my room with the lamp glowing low and opened the old box at the back of my closet. Inside were neatly organized files, deeds, bank statements, old letters from the bank when I'd bought the building all those years ago. The building they thought was just my home. They had no idea. They didn't know I owned it all. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal on the deed. I remembered the day I signed it. My hands shook then, not from age but from pride. I had nothing when I started. No family money. No safety net. Just determination. I promised myself back then I'd never be powerless again. That promise was about to be kept. The next morning I fixed myself a cup of black coffee and watched them from the porch. They were already talking to a man in a suit, a real estate agent probably. They were smiling and gesturing like they already owned the place. They didn't see me at first. But when they did, their smiles faltered just a little. I smiled back. Slow. Controlled. Like someone who knew something they didn't. Because I did. They were playing checkers. I was playing chess. And the game had just begun. They thought I was old and weak. They forgot I was the woman who built this roof over their heads with my own hands. They forgot who they were dealing with. But they were about to remember. I'd make sure of it. The night before everything started to change, I sat on my porch with a blanket over my lap, listening to the wind hum through the trees. I'd always found peace in the quiet, the kind that let memories drift back like old photographs. That's when I remembered the day I bought the building. It wasn't some lucky break. It was blood, sweat, and years of stubbornness that no one thought I had in me. I was 37 then. My husband had passed 2 years earlier, and I was raising 3 kids while working double shifts at the diner. I didn't have anyone to lean on. Just my own 2 hands and a heart that refused to give up. The building had been falling apart back then. A broken old structure at the edge of town. Most people saw a ruin. I saw possibility. I saw a way to build a future where my children would never have to struggle like I did. The bank didn't want to give me the loan. They didn't think a widow with no fancy degree could handle something like that. But I wore them down. I walked in there every single week for 3 months until they finally agreed. I signed the papers in a wrinkled second-hand coat with only $27 in my purse. But I walked out owning something bigger than myself, a chance. The first winter was brutal. Pipes burst. The roof leaked. I spent more nights with a wrench in my hand than asleep. My hands cracked and bled, but I never backed down. Tenants came slowly at first. Single mothers, retired couples. A teacher who couldn't afford a fancy condo but loved the neighborhood. I fixed the building one paycheck at a time. And eventually, that building became my fortress. I never told my kids how much I owned. At first it was because I wanted them to make their own lives, to not grow up feeling entitled. Later it became something else. A piece of my heart I kept for myself. Every check I collected from the tenants, every floorboard I replaced with my own hands, every nail I hammered. It reminded me who I was long before anyone called me Mom. That's why their plan cut so deep. They thought I had nothing. They saw me as weak, helpless, a burden to be packed up and moved away. But what they didn't know was that the very building they were scheming to sell was mine. Not just my apartment. The entire thing. A week later, Jessica came over with Linda. They sat on the couch like they were staging an intervention. Mom, we've been talking, Jessica began. She always liked to lead the charge. We found a great nursing home. It's really nice, they have gardens, activities, nurses who can check on you. You'll love it. Linda chimed in like a chorus. We just want you to be safe, Mom. You don't have to worry about the house anymore. We'll take care of everything. I leaned back in my chair and let them talk. I'd learned that silence made people reveal more than they intended. Jessica reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were printed papers, brochures, contracts, maybe even power of attorney documents. She placed them on the table like a gift. Just look these over. We can take care of the legal side. All you have to do is sign and we'll handle the rest. No stress for you. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I picked up the papers slowly, like someone unsure of what they were doing. My hands shook just enough to feed the image they'd painted of me, frail and tired. They didn't know that inside I was counting every step of their little plan. I pretended to read slowly, but I'd already caught the wording on one page. It wasn't about managing the property. It was about transferring control. I placed the folder back down gently. I'll think about it, I said softly. That was all it took. Jessica's shoulders relaxed. Linda smiled with relief. They thought the trap was closing. But that night after they left, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. My lawyer. He'd helped me buy the building decades ago and kept everything in order over the years. When I told him what was happening, his voice hardened. They can't touch a thing without your signature. And even if they try, you have legal standing over the entire property. We'll make sure they learn that the hard way. I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Because I wasn't powerless. I never was. I just let them think I was. The next morning, I went down to the basement where I kept the old filing cabinet. I opened drawer after drawer, deeds, contracts, copies of rent receipts, tax records. Every piece of paper that proved my life's work sat neatly organized because I'd always planned ahead. Not for this betrayal, no, I never imagined that. But for anything life might throw at me. As I ran my hand over the folder with the deed, I whispered to myself, you built this. You earned this. And no one's taking it away from you. That afternoon, I went for a slow walk past the building. It stood tall and solid, the bricks warm in the sunlight. Tenants waved at me, people who'd known me for years. Some even called me Miss May. A name that still made me smile. They didn't see me as old or useless. They saw me as the woman who gave them a place to live when no one else would. I looked up at the top floor where my apartment was. I'd worked too hard, too long to let my own children shove me out of it. I may have been older now, but that building was my heartbeat. And if they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. But they wouldn't even see it coming. Because I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to let them build their little plan step by step. And then I'd pull the ground right out from under them. I smiled to myself as I walked back home. They thought they were moving me out. But soon they'd learn who really held the keys. It was a Thursday afternoon when they finally made their move. I could feel it in the air the moment I woke up. That charged quiet that comes before a storm. Linda was the first to arrive. She knocked on the door with that careful, overly bright smile she always wore when she thought she was being clever. "Hi, Mom," she sang out, stepping inside without waiting for me to answer. Jessica followed close behind, carrying a manila envelope tucked under her arm. She wore a tailored blazer like this was some kind of board meeting. And then came Eric, trailing in last, avoiding my eyes. He couldn't look at me anymore. Maybe because deep down he still had a scrap of guilt left. They all gathered around the living room like it wasn't my house. Like it already belonged to them. Linda opened the curtains, Jessica set the envelope on the coffee table, and Eric hovered by the window. "Mom," Jessica began in that smooth, rehearsed tone, "we've arranged everything. It's going to be so easy for you. We've spoken to the nursing home director. They have a private room ready, meals included, 24-hour care. You won't have to worry about a thing anymore." Linda jumped in. "And you'll still be close to us. We'll visit all the time. It's for the best, Mom. We just want you to be safe." Safe. That word rang hollow. I'd kept myself safe for 72 years without their help. But they said it like they were saints doing me a favor. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, letting them think I was still the passive woman they wanted me to be. Then Jessica pulled out the papers. "We just need your signature. This will let us handle the property, sell it, and manage your care. It's not complicated. It's just the responsible thing to do." I reached out slowly, taking the papers from her hand. My fingers grazed the corner, firm, steady. "And what exactly happens after I sign?" I asked. Jessica gave a nervous laugh. Well, nothing changes for you. We'll just have control over the property and... I cut her off with a quiet, steady voice. Control. That's what this is about. Her smile faltered. Eric shifted uncomfortably. Linda looked down at her hands. They'd been so sure of themselves. So confident that I wouldn't notice what they were doing. I pretended to squint at the papers like I needed help. Why don't you read it to me? I asked sweetly. Jessica hesitated. It's just legal language. You don't need to. I tilted my head slightly. Read it. Her throat bobbed. She started mumbling through the lines, but I caught every word. Power of attorney. Transfer of property management. Right to sell. The words were like little knives. When she finished, she tried to smile again. See? It's really simple. I looked at each of their faces. These were the children I'd carried in my arms, wiped tears from, worked night after night for. And here they were, trying to erase me like I was some old signature on a page. I nodded slowly, as if I understood nothing. All right, I said softly. Why don't you leave these papers here with me? I'll take a look tonight. And tomorrow we can go sign them. Their shoulders relaxed in unison. They actually believed it. Jessica beamed like a fox who thought she'd won. That's perfect, Mom. This will make everything easier for everyone. I walked them to the door, waved as they left, and closed it behind them. Then I locked the door, went straight to the kitchen, and called my lawyer. He answered on the second ring. I was expecting your call, he said. I've got the papers, I told him. They're trying to take everything. Bring them to me tomorrow, he said. And don't sign a single thing. They can't touch what's yours without your consent. And they definitely can't sell what they don't own. I looked down at the papers in my hands and let out a slow breath. They thought they were clever. But they were children playing in a game I'd already mastered decades ago. Later that night, while the house was quiet, I sat in my bedroom with the paper spread out in front of me. The words didn't scare me. They fueled me. I thought about all those nights I'd stood in the freezing cold fixing a busted pipe, about the loans I paid off penny by penny, about the people who called me Miss May with respect. I thought about everything I'd built when no one thought I could. I wasn't going to be pushed out of my own life. The next morning I dressed carefully. Not fancy, just strong. The dark wool coat I'd worn when I bought the building. Black leather shoes polished, hair pinned neatly. I looked in the mirror and saw not an old woman. I saw the same woman who walked into a bank 35 years ago and refused to take no for an answer. I tucked the papers into my purse and walked out the door with my chin high. When I reached my lawyer's office, he was waiting with coffee and a firm plan. They can't force you into anything, he said as he scanned the papers. And if they try to move ahead without your consent, they're committing fraud. But, he tapped the folder. We can do better than just stopping them. We can make sure they never get their hands on this building. I leaned forward. What do you have in mind? He explained step by step how we could secure everything. Transfer the building to a trust in my name, lock out any attempts at power grabs, and ensure every brick stayed under my control until the day I chose otherwise. I listened carefully. My heart beat steady, not from fear but from resolve. I'd spent my whole life protecting my children. Now, for the first time, I was protecting myself. When I left his office, the sun was shining, the air crisp. I walked past the building again on my way home. Tenants waved. Kids were riding bikes down the sidewalk. Life was moving steady and sure. And as I stood there on the corner, I whispered to myself, they have no idea who they're dealing with. The storm they started was about to turn right back on them. And I was ready. The next few days, I let them believe they'd already won. That was the best part of it all. Watching them walk around my house like little foxes circling a hen they thought was too weak to run. They didn't know I'd already turned the game around. My lawyer had moved fast. By Friday afternoon, the building was officially placed in a trust solely under my control. No power of attorney. No backdoor deals. Not a single signature of theirs would ever touch it. But I didn't say a word. I waited. Linda started dropping by more often, pretending to help me pack. She'd bring empty boxes and talk about how exciting my new room at the nursing home would be. Like this was some kind of vacation. Jessica called daily, her voice sugary sweet, asking if I'd read the papers. And Eric, poor Eric, avoided me altogether. Guilt has a way of silencing the weakest. Saturday afternoon, I was sitting in my armchair when I saw them through the window, Jessica's car pulling up, followed by a white sedan. A man in a gray suit stepped out. A real estate agent. I watched as they straightened their jackets and whispered to each other at the gate. They were nervous. They hadn't told me about this meeting because they thought I wouldn't understand. But I'd known it was coming. People like them, once they smell money, they rush. They came in like they owned the place. Jessica plastered on her fake warm smile. Mom's surprise. We thought it might be nice for you to meet someone. This is Peter, he's a realtor. He's just here to give us an idea of what the property is worth. I didn't flinch. Is that so? I said softly, leaning on my cane just enough to keep up their little illusion of fragility. The realtor extended his hand. Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. You've got a lovely home here. I hear it's in a prime location. Buildings like this don't stay on the market long. Buildings. Not house. He wasn't just here to look at my apartment. He was here for the whole structure. They told him it was theirs to sell. Linda chimed in, her voice bright and careless. We're just getting a head start. It'll make things so much easier once she's settled in the home. I turned to look at her, really look at her. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Not fully. Jessica did, though. She stared straight at me like she wanted to see how much I'd break. But I didn't break. I smiled. A calm, steady smile that made her shift in her seat. The realtor began walking through the living room, talking about renovations, potential buyers, modernizing the building. My building. He didn't know he was touring a fortress with walls thicker than their greed. When he finished his little speech, Jessica cleared her throat. So Mom, once we get this sold, you'll have all the money you need to live comfortably in the nursing home. You won't have to worry about a thing. I tilted my head, pretending to think. And when were you going to tell me this? I asked gently. She blinked, caught off guard. Well, we didn't want to overwhelm you with too many details. We just want what's best for you. I leaned forward a little, keeping my voice low, measured. What's best for me? Or what's best for you? That silence, it was sharp enough to cut glass. Eric shifted uncomfortably, staring at the floor. Linda bit her lip. Jessica straightened her spine like a soldier trying to stay in control. The realtor cleared his throat. Maybe I should. I waved a hand. No. Stay. I think it's time everyone hears this. I pushed myself up slowly from the armchair. My knees ached a little, but my back stayed straight. This building, I said, running my hand along the wall. Do you know how many nights I spent in the cold fixing broken pipes in this place? How many roofs I patched myself when we couldn't afford a contractor? How many rents I collected one door at a time? They said nothing. Jessica crossed her arms. Mom, we're not trying to disrespect you. But you are, I said, cutting through her words like a blade. You came into my home, decided what would happen to me, and tried to sell something you don't even own. Linda blinked. Mom, what are you talking about? I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the folder my lawyer gave me, and set it on the table with a satisfying thud. This building isn't yours to sell. It never was. It's mine. Every inch. Every floor. And as of last week, it's legally protected. You can't touch it. Not with your signatures, not with your fake smiles, not with your little schemes. The realtor's face paled. Wait, I thought. You thought wrong, I said firmly. You can show yourself out now. He gathered his papers quickly and backed out of the house, muttering apologies. I turned my gaze on my children, my blood, my family. Jessica's face flushed red, part shock, part anger. Linda stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. Eric, my soft-hearted son, finally met my eyes, and I saw guilt sitting heavy in them. Jessica was the first to break the silence. You lied to us. I almost laughed. I lied? You tried to sell the roof over my head. You tried to put me away like a piece of furniture. Linda stammered. We thought you didn't need it anymore. I shook my head slowly. No. What you thought is that I was weak. That I wouldn't notice. That I wouldn't fight back. You forgot who raised you. You forgot who built all of this. They didn't have an answer. They just stood there, small in a house they thought they could claim. I walked back to my armchair, sat down, and folded my hands. This conversation is over. And from now on, if any of you set foot in this house with another scheme like this, I won't hesitate to cut you out completely. Do I make myself clear? Jessica's jaw tightened. Linda nodded weakly. Eric just looked away. When they finally left, the house fell quiet again. But this time it wasn't heavy silence. It was power. Mine. They had thought they could corner me. Instead, they'd walk straight into my wall of stone. And the best part? I wasn't done yet. There was still one more move to make, and it would make sure they never tried anything like this again. The next morning, the air felt different. It was the kind of morning when you know a storm has passed but the ground still trembles from its weight. I sat at my kitchen table with a steaming mug of coffee, listening to the birds outside. The realtor's shocked face from the day before still lingered in my mind. But what stayed even longer was the look on my children's faces. Stunned, small, cornered. They finally understood that I wasn't someone to be pushed aside. But I also knew them too well. They weren't going to give up that easily. When people let greed take root, it doesn't just disappear. It festers. Finds another way to grow. So I decided to get ahead of them before they could even catch their breath. By late morning, Jessica called. Her voice was low, almost too calm. "Mom," she said. "We should talk. Yesterday got out of hand." Out of hand. I repeated softly, letting the words roll off my tongue like a stone in a river. That's an interesting way to describe trying to sell my building. She sighed, feigning patience. "We just didn't know, okay? If you told us about the trust or whatever, we wouldn't have done it this way." That made me laugh, a real dry laugh. "Jessica, you didn't even bother to ask. You assumed I was helpless. That's worse than not knowing." There was a beat of silence. Then she said, "Can we come over? All of us. We just want to talk like a family." I agreed. Not because I owed them anything, but because it was time to draw a clear, unshakable line. An hour later, I heard their car pull up. This time they came without the realtor, without fake smiles. But the tension on their faces told me this wasn't an apology visit. Jessica walked in first, confident as always, though her confidence now had cracks. Linda followed, chewing on her lip like a nervous child. And Eric trailed behind, quiet, shoulders slouched. I didn't bother offering them coffee. I sat at the head of the table and waited. Jessica cleared her throat. "Look, Mom, I know you're upset. But we're your children. We were just trying to make sure you're taken care of. We didn't mean to hurt you." I tilted my head slowly. "You didn't mean to hurt me, but you did. You didn't mean to disrespect me, but you did. You didn't mean to take my home from me, but that's exactly what you were doing." Eric finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. We thought you'd be better off in a place where people could take care of you. You're older now. We didn't think you wanted to be alone here anymore." I turned to him, and for a second, I saw the boy I used to hold when he was scared of thunder. The boy who would bury his face in my neck and whisper, "Don't let go, Mama." But that boy wasn't here anymore. This was a man who'd stood silently while his sisters plotted to erase me. "I've been taking care of myself longer than any of you have been alive," I said quietly. "And I sure don't need anyone deciding what I should do with my life while I'm still living it." Linda's voice cracked. "But what about us? We thought maybe if we sold the building we could make sure everyone had something. You've never told us anything about what you owned, and—" I raised a hand and she went silent. "That's right. I never told you. Because I wanted you to build something for yourselves, not sit around waiting for my life to end so you could pick at what I left behind. That building isn't just property. It's my life. My blood is in those walls." Jessica bristled. "We're your kids. It's not wrong for us to care about what happens next." I leaned forward, my voice sharper now. "No, Jessica. It's not wrong to care. But what you did wasn't caring. You didn't sit with me and ask what I wanted. You didn't offer to help if I needed it. You made a plan behind my back. You tried to control me." She didn't look away this time. But the fire in her eyes wasn't love, it was wounded pride. "I've already spoken with my lawyer," I said firmly. "The building is in a trust. It's legally protected. No one touches it but me. Not now, not ever unless I say so. And as far as I'm concerned, if any of you ever try to go behind my back again, I will make sure you're not written into a single line of my will." Linda gasped softly. Eric looked down. Jessica stiffened. "You wouldn't," she said flatly. I met her eyes. "Try me." For the first time she didn't have a comeback. Eric rubbed the back of his neck, looking like a boy again. Mom, we didn't mean for it to get this far. I swear. I went along with them. I didn't want to hurt you. Then you should have stood up, I said softly. Silence can hurt just as much as action. The room grew heavy. No yelling, no slamming doors. Just the truth sitting on the table like a weight they couldn't ignore. Finally, Linda whispered. So what now? What happens now, I said slowly, is simple. You remember that I'm still alive. You respect me while I am. You stop treating me like I'm already gone. And if you can't do that, then you stay out of my house. Out of my building. Out of my life. The silence stretched long, the kind that settles into your bones. I could see it on their faces. The shock of realizing the woman they dismissed was the same one who built the ground they stood on. Jessica opened her mouth, then closed it. Linda nodded faintly. Eric wiped at his eyes like a man ashamed. When they finally walked out, they didn't say much. The door clicked shut behind them, and for the first time in weeks, the air in my house felt clean. I poured myself another cup of coffee and walked to the window. The sunlight hit the bricks of the building across the street, the one I'd bought with nothing but grit and stubborn hope. My building. My legacy. They thought they could take it from me. They forgot who I was. But I'd made sure they remembered now. The days after that confrontation were quiet, almost eerily so. My children stopped dropping by unannounced. Jessica stopped calling daily. Linda no longer helped with meals or errands, and Eric, well, he mostly avoided the house entirely. It was like the air itself had shifted, carrying the weight of the truth they finally couldn't deny. For me, the quiet was a relief. I could walk through my home without feeling eyes on me, without hearing whispered plans behind my back. But I didn't let my guard down. I knew that when greed and entitlement collided, people often tried again, only more cautiously this time. I spent those days tending to my building, checking in on tenants, making minor repairs here and there. Each step I took reminded me why I'd fought so hard for this life. I still remembered the freezing winter nights spent fixing pipes, the scorching summer afternoons painting walls in the sun, and the countless sacrifices I'd made so my children would have a future. And now I could walk with the peace of knowing that future included me, not just them. One afternoon, Eric finally came to visit. He knocked lightly and I opened the door. His face was drawn, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. Mom, he said softly, I just wanted to apologize. I know I went along with them and I shouldn't have. I thought I was helping, but I see now. I see how wrong I was. I studied him for a long moment. This was the child who once buried his face in my neck in fear, the child who I had protected from so much. Eric, I said finally, you can't take back what happened, but you can learn from it. Actions have consequences, and you've seen that firsthand now. He nodded, swallowing hard. I do. I promise I'll do better. I hope you can forgive me. I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. I love you, Eric. But love doesn't mean letting someone walk over me. Remember that. He smiled faintly, relieved but still shaken. I will, Mom. I promise. We spent the afternoon together just talking like we hadn't in years. And for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like a mother and son, not a property owner and a schemer. Meanwhile, the rest of the family remained distant, which suited me just fine. Jessica and Linda were learning the hard way that their plans had failed, and I could see the shift in the neighborhood. People whispered when they walked by my building, tenants occasionally mentioning how Miss May had handled her family situation like a force of nature. And I didn't mind the reputation at all. It was earned. I also took the opportunity to put safeguards in place for the future. I updated the trust, added clear stipulations for how my property would be managed, and ensured that any attempt to circumvent my control would be legally impossible. Every line in those documents was a reminder. I was in charge. Not them. Not anyone. But even as I felt the sweet satisfaction of victory, I knew the most important part wasn't about the building or the papers or the power. It was about respect, respect that had been absent for so long, respect that I would no longer negotiate for. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the magnolia tree outside my window, I sat in my armchair with a warm cup of tea. The house was quiet, peaceful, the kind of calm that comes after a storm has fully passed. I allowed myself a small smile. I had one. Not just legally but emotionally, spiritually. I had reminded my children that I was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who built her life from nothing and wasn't about to be pushed aside. And best of all, I didn't have to lift a hand violently, didn't have to yell, didn't have to prove anything with anger. The truth, the law, and my patience had done all the work for me. I looked out the window at my building once more. Its bricks glowed in the fading light, a testament to decades of labor, love, and resilience. And in that moment I understood something deeply. It wasn't just about holding on to a building. It was about holding on to myself, my dignity, and the life I'd fought so hard to create. And they had finally learned. No one disrespects me. Not now, not ever. The storm had passed. And I, Miss May, stood stronger than ever. Weeks passed, and the house returned to its usual rhythm. Tenants went about their days, the neighborhood children played in the yard. And I moved through my home with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived storms far bigger than family betrayals. I no longer feared the scheming of my children because the truth had been laid bare. The law had backed me, and my strength was unmistakable. One morning I woke to a knock on the door. It was Eric. He carried a small basket of fresh bread and fruit. His face, once clouded with guilt, now held a quiet humility. "Mom," he said softly, "I wanted to help today. I know I can't change the past, but maybe I can help in the future." I nodded, letting a small smile form. "That's a good start, Eric. Sometimes the hardest part is knowing when to step back and when to step forward. You're learning." He set the basket on the kitchen counter and followed me to the building. Together we checked on tenants, replaced a few loose boards, and painted a railing that had been peeling. His hands were clumsy at first, but he worked steadily. I noticed something shift in him. The boy who once followed me everywhere was back in a way, but older, wiser, and understanding the weight of responsibility. Meanwhile, Jessica and Linda were quieter than ever. They didn't dare push, didn't dare make a move, and even though it stung their pride, I didn't have to remind them of their place. They were learning the lesson I had taught in the strongest possible way. Respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned, and when it's ignored, consequences follow. One afternoon, as I sat in my armchair overlooking the building, I reflected on everything that had happened. My children had tried to take from me, but they underestimated my resolve, my foresight, and my courage. They had thought wealth and property were the ultimate prize, but the real victory was reclaiming my voice, my power, and my dignity. I had learned something vital through this ordeal. Family is complicated. Love doesn't always protect you from betrayal, but strength, patience, and intelligence do. I had raised my children to survive, and now in a bitter twist of fate, they had learned that survival alone is not enough. Integrity and respect are what truly matter. That evening, the house glowed in the golden light of the setting sun. I walked through the rooms, touching the walls and remembering every struggle and triumph that had built this life. Each floorboard, each brick, each window pane was a testament to decades of perseverance. I had fought for this life and I had won. Not just legally but morally, emotionally, and spiritually. I also realized that forgiveness was possible, even when the wounds ran deep. Eric was learning. Jessica and Linda had time to reflect. And as long as they respected me, my home, and my life, I could allow a cautious reconciliation, not out of weakness but from strength. That night, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, I felt a profound sense of peace. The magnolia tree outside, planted years ago, rustled softly in the wind. It had weathered storms, harsh winters, and blistering summers, yet it stood tall. It reminded me of myself. I had weathered storms of grief, betrayal, and greed, yet I stood stronger than ever. My children had tried to put me in a nursing home. They had thought my life was theirs to control. But they didn't know one crucial fact. I had built my life with my own hands, and I was not done yet. I smiled, sipping my tea. The building across the street was safe, the tenants were secure, and I was in command of my life. I was Miss May, a woman who would never be underestimated again. And as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, I felt a deep certainty settle in my heart. No one would ever take my life, my home, or my dignity from me. Not ever. The storm had come, and my children had learned their lesson. But I had not just survived, I had triumphed. And this was only the beginning of the peace, control, and respect I had always deserved. I leaned back in my chair, letting the night air wash over me. My story was my own, And it would end exactly as I chose. The building, my life, and my legacy were safe. And I would carry forward strong, unbroken, and unapologetically me. No one could ever forget that Miss May owned not just the building, but everything she had fought for, including herself. The house, the building, and the life I'd created stood as a testament. A woman who refused to be silenced, controlled, or pushed aside. A woman who had the courage to protect what was hers. And in that triumph I found the greatest satisfaction of all: freedom, respect, and peace. The story was over for them. But for me it had only just begun.